Hello. So this video we will try to use the color that we created from that we transmitted from the first view to the second in order to paint. I want to start by saying that this video is optional and this is considered advanced. So if you feel very comfortable so far and would like to learn something new beyond what we are trying, beyond what this project is about, continue with this video. If this is your very first time really doing some development, I would suggest that you leave this video and maybe come back to it later towards the end of the semester. But because it involves some things that you may find overwhelming if this is new. If you're comfortable, keep going. If you feel not comfortable, this video is optional. It is not really required for the project. So what is it that we're going to do? We want to use the color that we constructed in one view to paint on the second view, using it and use our finger as a brush. So how would this work? Before we get to the technical part of how we implement this, let's think first of how this actually takes place. So this is our second view. And I have to fix my drawing here. So on the second view, I want to paint. So what is painting? Painting is using your finger. You first touch. You touch. Come on. You touch and then you move. Maybe I can, since this keep coming, let me use it. You touch and then you move. So once you touch, you're creating a dot, and as you move, you're creating more dots. Probably if I change the size a little bit more, it will become clear. So you touch, you create a dot, and then you keep moving. Every time you move, you're creating another dot and you're connecting those dots together. When you touch, you create a dot, and then when you move, when you drag, you're creating another dot and you're connecting between the two. So you create a dot, you drag, another dot is drawing, and then you're connecting between the two. So in order for us to really simulate this or make our app intelligent and smart to include that stuff, I need to be able to capture the touch. So the event here, and go back to the beginning reading, we said that apps are driven by event. The event here that will drive this is a touch begins. Once the user begins a touch, it makes a dot. So I want to know where is that dot. When the user touch, I want to capture the location of the touch of the user. So I have here the user makes a touch. The touch has a location. I want to capture that location in a point. Then the user will drag. In order to paint, you're really dragging. You're dragging. So when you drag, you're basically moving. This is another event. The touch is now moved. So the touch is now moving from one location to the other. So the touch begins. And then the touch moves. As the touch moves, I want to get the point or the location as it moves. And then as the touch moves, I want to display the line that traces the touch. So I want to repaint this view. I want this view to repaint itself every time the touches moves. Now painting is the process of changing the colors or making the dots on the screen, on the physical screen. It's a very involved process in order to paint that physical screen in front of you. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about the details of the painting process because there's a library that does this for us. The view component knows how to paint itself, so we don't really need to worry about that. So in order for us to get those touches going, I need to take the view and make this a very special view. This will be a view that knows what to do when the user touches anywhere on that view. When the user touches, the view needs to collect the point that the location of that touch. Then when the touches moves, it needs to collect the second point, and then the third point, and then the fourth point, and then the fifth point, and the sixth point, and make a collection of points representing the trace of the touch that the user had on the view. Once you have that collection of points, you want to connect those points with a line. Or with a path. And there is a library that does that. So there is a library that connects the points with a path, with a path, and that library is called the user interface. And there are different types of path. The one we are going to use is called Bezier path, and you can look that up. And we are going to use another library that creates a collection of points that are changeable, NS mutable array. This is a library that keeps track of a collection of points, and this is a library that does the collection. And along the way, we will learn about how we can enable our app to repeat instructions more than one time. Repeat instructions more than one time. And we're gonna call this loop. Alright, so let's start our work. This is the view in which we are going to make the drawing, but that view currently, if you bring in the utility pane, click on the view and go to the attribute inspector, as you can see, this is a standard view. The class that represents this view is the standard view class. Since I want to customize this view, I need to create my own class and connect it to that view. I did this in video 5 on the controller. This is the controller. As you can see here, it changes, and I connected the controller with this class. Actually, I don't really need the controller now, but I do need the view since now I will be painting. So to add a class for the view, right click on the project, say I want a new file, Objective-C class, next, and I want this to be a subclass of view, UI view. And then I'm gonna call this painting view. And then next. Save it over here, or you can click on this and save it there. So now I have a painting view. Then I need to select my view and say, instead of this standard view class, I want to use the painting view for this one. Alright. Inside my painting view, inside the header file of my painting view, I want to define some variables that will be used throughout the implementation modules. To do that, I'm defining now in the header file, in the interface, something that is not a property. So I start by creating a block or a body for it using the curly brace opening and close. This is saying that I'm creating a memory location very similar to the ones we created inside the change color action module, except that I want them to be accessible or visible to all the different modules inside the view, not just one. The variables I'm going to use are, number one, variable to store the color. So I'm going to use UI color star, and I'm going to call this is my painting color. This is the color that I'm going to use to paint, which was constructed in the previous screen and is saved in the user default. The second, I'm going to use a variable to store the collection of points representing the user touches, and this will be the type NS mutable array, which is an array that changes changes the data inside it, a star, and I'm going to call this the points. And then the third one is a reference to or a variable representing the path, and this will be the UI Bezier path, and then I'm going to call this path. These three variables will be used throughout my my application. So now we switch it to the implementation. There will be a lot of code in here. As you can see here, there is the draw rectangle. This is the method. This is an action that is commented out and says only override draw rect if you perform custom drawing, which is our case here. If you do empty implementation, it will affect the performance of your view, and in our case I am actually going to need that because we're doing our own custom view. So delete that comment, the star comment before it, and because we need that method. I don't want the init with frame, I don't really need it, so take that out. So let's start. We're going to add 4 modules in addition to the draw rectangle. Inside the draw rectangle we will draw what happens, but before that I need to respond to the touchBegin action, and I need to initialize everything when the view is initialized. So I start first by initialize the variables when the view is initialized. So put the star to access the init method. This is the init with coder method that will be called. Now there are 3 different init methods that are called at different times. For this particular case, the init with coder will be the one called that we need. We will start by, and we're going to be introducing multiple things. There's a variable called self. As you can see, it represents the painting view. Next to it here is called painting view, which is the same name as my class. This self is a way for us to reference this particular class. So when I say self, I'm saying go ahead and initialize the standard view. So send the message to the standard view and say init with coder. What this does is it sends a message to the standard view, which is a parent of this view, to initialize itself first. Then I'm going to add something, check if the initialization is correct. is correct, then proceed. If not, stop. How do we do this? By adding a statement called if statement. The if statement is a conditional statement that allows us to make a condition. So this say if the self is true, if there is something inside self, it is not empty, then perform all those instructions. This allows us or gives us the opportunity that if something wrong happened in the initialization, the instructions are all skipped and it doesn't generate any problems or any errors. So what instructions do we want? Step number 1 in the initializations is to retrieve a reference to the shared user default. So NS user defaults is star, and I'm gonna call it defaults equal, and then send the message. We've done that in the previous video. NS user default is standard user default. Then retrieve the color values. So we'll retrieve them as float. So I will say give me the float red value equal, send the message to default to give you the float for key, and then if you recall from the previous video, the key is red number, and then I want to repeat that again for blue. Float for key and then blue number, and then the green value defaults float for key, and then that's the green number, and then the last one is the alpha defaults float for key, and then the alpha number. And then step number 3 is to construct the color. So we saved the color in the painting color. So we say painting color equal, and then I want to send the message to the UI color to create a color with red, green, blue, and alpha. So with red using the red value, with green using the green value, blue using the blue value, and alpha using the alpha value. So now I constructed the color based on the user selection from the first view. Then step number 4, initialize or create the Bezier path reference. So I'll say the path equal UI Bezier path, and then I will say give me a Bezier path. So this creates and returns a new Bezier path object. Then the last thing is to create the memory, the collection. Create the collection to store the points. So we called it points, and points is NS mutable array. So I will say NS mutable array, and then I will say allocate memory for the mutable array and initialize that mutable array. And then finally, after you finish the if statement, the if block, after you're done with that, then I say return self, because you now initialized this painting view. There are some new things in here. The if statement is new, which receives a condition. If this condition is true, perform these instructions. If it is not new, don't do anything. Using the init, this is something copy for now. I don't have to worry about it. This is similar to what we did before. The Bezier path is new. I have to create it first, and then I'm using the Bezier path library to retrieve a reference to the Bezier path, and then the points. This is new. There are two messages nested in one another. The first message highlighted in front of you to allocate memory for a collection of items, and then the second message goes to that allocation and say initialize those items, and this is important before we start adding any items to that collection. Alright, so that was the initialization. The next step is to capture the touches and retrieve the location from the touch and add it to that collection. So we will do that in two modules, one when the touch begin and one when the touch moves. So start with dash, and then you start typing touch, and you see here the touch begin. This is what I call life cycle module, which is modules that are already defined and that responds to an event that takes place outside your action or your control. Since your app is running inside the operating system, when the user touches, the operating system captures the touch regardless of what you're going to do and notifies this particular module. So I want to use this module, so hit enter. So that is the touch begin module. Give it a beginning and an end, and the touch begin receives a set of touches. This is the mathematical set, which is a collection of unique touches, and receives the event that the user has created. We're not going to be using the event, but we want those touches. So the one touch is grouped together in a collection of touches, but we know there's only one touch in it, but I need to retrieve that touch from it. So we will do a few things in order to retrieve that touch, and from the touch grab the location and then add the location to this collection of points. So the first step is to convert the touches from a set to an array. So in this array, star touch, this is a collection of touch, and then I will say to the touches, give me all the objects that you have. So now I have a reference to all the touches. I will use another construct similar to if, but this construct loops. So I will say iterate over the collection of touches to retrieve the location and add it as a point to the collection of points. So I will say here CG core graphics point, and this is I'm sorry. So I will say for, and I will say for each touch that exists, and I will give it a name, any name T that exists in the array of touches. For each one of those, repeat, do the following instructions for every single touch in that collection of touches. CG point P, and then use that temporary name I gave to each touch, and use the message location in view, and say give me the location of that touch with reference to that particular view, and then I need to convert that point from the CG point type, which is core graphic type, to a value type, so I can add it to the array. So I'll say ns value point value. Now I would say ns value with cg point p. Then add the value to the array, to the points collection. So this will say points, add object, and add the value, add the point value. So that's all what I want to do in the touchBegin. When the touch moves, I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing when the touch moves, except when the touch moves, I want to draw the object as well. So I will notify the view to draw itself. So let's add the touches move module. So start typing touch. Here is the touches moved. So hit enter. And I can copy everything that I did here, everything inside, copy that, command copy, command paste. And after you're done with this, I want to notify the view to draw itself. So this notification by sending a message to self and say send the message set needs display, which saying that there is a need to display itself or there's a need to view itself. So it starts to call this draw rectangle. So this set needs display notifies the view to do that it's time to draw itself, which automatically causes it to call the draw rectangle method. Inside the draw rectangle, I need to manage the drawing or enter the drawing. So in the drawing, draw the path of the touches. So I know that this method will be called every time the user's finger moves or the touches moves. So I want to draw the path of the touches. So I want to start from a starting point, which is the first point in the collection of touches, and then draw from that point forward for all the points that are currently added. If there are no touch points yet, like the view is loading but there are no touches, then I don't want to do anything. So I will use the same condition. I will say if the number of points, the count of the points, if the count of the points is greater than 0, then I want to do everything. But if it is not greater than 0, meaning that the collection of points is empty, then I don't want to do anything. So what do I want to do? First thing is get the first point in the collection. So I will call CG point, starting point, and then I will ask the collection of points to give me the first object at the index 0. And then I want to convert this to a CG value, so I will send another message, say give it to me in a CG point value. So I'm doing a nested message here. This is just to make a conversion from the regular value to a CG point, because the Bezier path uses the CG point type. Then move the path to the starting point. So now I'm sending a message to path and I'm saying move to point and starting point. So now the path moved to the first point. Then I want to loop or iterate or loop over the collection of points and add a line from the starting point, add a line connecting to that point. So I would say for, and this is a different type of for, I'm saying give for each and using a counter that starts from 1 and going over all the points in the collection, the count of the points, and increment by 1. This is all new to you. And inside this, for each one of those points, I want to get the current point, which is going to be, I'm going to call it V, which will be very similar to the starting point, but instead of object at index 0, object at index I for each one of those. And then I want to get the CG point value. So this line is the same as the starting point, but in the starting point I started from the 0 point, and this one I started from the iterative point, the iteration that I have, and then call the path and say move to point this point V that I created. So after this loop will go through the entire collection, and I'm sorry, not move to point, add line to point, add line to point, add line to point V. So I have a path now from a starting point with a connecting line. I can set properties for the path. For instance, I can set the line width. So this is, let me set it to 3. And set the color of the path. And we're going to set that to the color that we selected. So I'll say path set stroke the message goes to the color and says set stroke. The set stroke color sets the this particular color to be the color of the stroke, and then notify the path that it is time to stroke. So we send the message to path and say stroke. Some of that stuff is new to you. The construction of an if statement is new to you. The construction of for is new to you as well. And using the messages inside the path, the Bezier path to draw, is also new. Let's try and see if this will work. So if you change the color and then say view and then try to move, here is the view and it is drawing whatever you're gonna draw. You can go back, change the color to something different, go back to the view and make the color and use the color to draw. Now notice the thickness of the line. It is set by this constant to 3, but similar to what we did for the color, you can add another slider here to change the value of the stroke, and instead of using 3, you retrieve that stroke from the similar to retrieving the colors, and you can use one of those variables to set the stroke over here. You can change the colors anywhere you want and come back and draw using that color that you draw with. One of the things you notice here that the colors, the objects are connected. Every time you draw, it starts from the starting point. It does not separate the different drawings that you make. And when you go back and come back here, it erases those drawings. To save the drawings from going back, when you go back and come back here again, and separating the drawing so every time you touch it starts something new, this will require more in-depth or more advanced work, and it could be a good final app for you who like to go in that route and expand on this. For now, in this optional part, I wanted to introduce you to the touches. I wanted to introduce you to having a custom view, and I wanted to introduce you to drawing or changing the way the view draw itself. This turned out longer than I expected. I hope you learned something new in it, and I repeat again that that's optional for the project. So if this was overwhelming, you can comfortably ignore it and come back to it whenever you need to. Thank you.